Well, hello, everybody. This is Dr. Alan Weinstein with my co-host, Dr. Randi Ross. Welcome to another episode of Building Your Wellness Brand Within Your Community. Today's episode is brought to you by Epic Consulting, making sure your electronic presence is all it needs to be. And Community Wellness Day. Every great opportunity begins with the first step. Take that step with Community Wellness Day and The System, the official marketing program of healthcare professionals everywhere, and the VIP app, the only application that allows you to bring your live events just like this one to the desktops, smartphones, and tablets of everyone that has you in their circles. New program release. Make sure you check this out. Google Plus in only 10 minutes. You could visit tinyurl.com/Google in 10. Well, if you're a regular viewer of our show, you're going to be familiar with Pastor Dan Stauffer. He's been on the show before, and we had such a great response that we just had to bring him back. So today, the successful business systems Pastor Dan Stauffer has created to reach his community. If you're not familiar with Pastor Dan, I call him Dr. Dan. I'm sure you'll hear that during the show. He's the co-founder and lead pastor of Life Church Jersey. He coaches existing pastors through Next Level Coaching. He's a trainer for the Association of Related Churches, and he mentors potential church planters through Reach Northeast. Here's Pastor Dan with his wife Stephanie, and you could visit them at lifechurchjersey.com. With that, Dr. Randi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Allen. Welcome to everyone. For those of you that are watching us either on the Google page, the Facebook page, our website, make sure you tell us where you're hanging out from, and feel free to ask questions. If we don't get to your questions during the event, we'll make sure to get back to you. Well, today's guest, it's exciting to have Pastor Dan back, and since his last appearance, which I guess was about 6 weeks ago now, I've actually had the pleasure of going up and visiting his church, and he took me through the entire process of how they run, and I'm going to use the word, the business of this church. And I could not have been more impressed, and I'm kind of hard to impress because I go to a lot of businesses and a lot of locations, and I just really thought it's very rare that I see someone that is just like nailed everything down to every little detail that you could think of to, to get people engaged, to have the message that they want and need to hear, and to have all the steps along the way to make sure that they're not dropping off. He's a really dynamic individual, and I think that Dan is going to be an ultra success in his community and just within the dynamic of the churches through this Northeast area. So without further ado, we're going to bring back Pastor Dan Stauffer. Welcome, Dan.
Well, thank you so much. It's really good to be here. It's really, it was great also having you on site. That was fun to be able to walk around and share that with you.
Yeah, it was really something. I've never. Dr. Allen's asking me to do something while I'm talking, so I apologize if I feel. Oh, wait 1 second before he tells me that I'm not doing my job. Yeah, and if we're a little off today, that's because I'm having technology challenges, and my main computer that I use that was all ready to go just crashed on me, so I jumped on another one. But I really recognize that even more so than when we've met virtually, when I met with you, that you're really all about systems. And I think that that's so important for any kind of business owner, to really have systems in place to be efficient and effective. I mean, you shared things with me, everything down to, how you have volunteers that come in. It's not just, random willy-nilly thing, that you want the right people in the right place, and, how you go, the steps you go through before you bring someone in that's an actual part of your staff and your team. So talk a little bit about, about your process of systems, and have you developed all of them by yourself, or have you gone and not reinvented the wheel all the time and utilized programs that are available for you?
Yeah, actually, this is great, because this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about, because I love systems. And no, we have not done it from scratch. We have someone that we follow a little bit. He says that creativity is seeing what somebody else has done and making it better for yourself. And so it's kind of what we've done, is just finding things that really fit within our culture, done in a way that we would want to do them, but at the same time, not just repeating it and using someone else's model kind of almost in a stale way, but really breathing our own life into it. And so systems is huge, because you can't, when we look at organizational structure or organizations that are growing, and obviously for us it's churches, so when we're talking to pastors of churches, looking at their church, helping them to jump from one level to the next of growth, we talk about how that growth is not a straight line up and to the right, but it's actually a series of S-curves, which, you study business, you know that there's ups and downs, and it's natural, and you can't get freaked out by it. But when growth happens, more so between the S-curves, so it's kind of like you're on one, you're on this roller coaster, you're starting to dip, starting to drop, and then there's, in that dip, it's not just an extension of the curve to go from one level of growth to the next, you jump the tracks. And so what we teach people to actually jump the tracks, land on that next level of growth, you're going to have to really look at systems, especially when the organization is new or small. We call it like going from family size to an organization, going from a family-sized church to an organized church, or a family-sized restaurant, or a family-run restaurant. A lot of times that doesn't have the best connotation to it. I know there's very successful family-run businesses, but they've had to learn systems as well. And so what we try to teach is that it's got to be easy, strategic, and obvious. People can't be guessing. It can't seem like a bunch of hoops. It's got to just be simple. And we're trying to get them to, whether it's someone new to the church, or whether it's somebody wanting to jump on a team and begin to lead and volunteer, we've got to, what we call, remove the personality from it. And so that I have all these little sayings to help us remember things, but we call it the Geico principle. We want to make it so easy a caveman can do it. It's really what our goal is. So as long as we can make it simple that anybody can walk up and do it, then it's easier to get involved, and it's easier to begin to serve. But those systems have to happen for growth to take place, because it can't just be on one person. So to multiply, to see the business grow or the organization to grow, to add more people into the mix, you've got to be able to stretch out what you're doing so that more people can get involved. So systems is huge, and we look at everything. And when there's an issue, we never blame a personality. I say never. We try not to. And if I begin to, I try to stop and like, okay, wait a second. No, this is a systems issue, and we say that all the time. If something's breaking down, it's not because of a person. If there's a breakdown in an individual, it's usually the system has not been working properly. So systems is huge in everything that we're doing here at Life Church.
I have a question, if I could jump in here, Pastor Dan, and that is, in developing your own church and your own business and all the coaching that you're doing to get other churches up to the level that you've created for your business and teaching them to do that, do you treat it first as a business, regardless that it's a church? I'm not talking content-wise. I'm talking about the setup of those different systems. Your main focus is, we're running this as a business in order to make it successful, so we set it up as it's a business, not that it's a church first and then the business is secondary. So
organizationally, yes, I would say that there's a strong side of, because it's without the system, there's no way to deliver the message. Without the structure, there's no way for us to get the word out, so to speak, or for people to come and experience what we do at Life Church. So the system, the organizational side of it, the business side of it is vital. It brings, especially in our part of the country, I think maybe more so, not maybe, it's definitely more so than you would find in maybe like the Bible Belt. Here in the Northeast, there's and justifiably so, there's a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of, is this legit? Is this, what's going on here? And so a lot of credibility takes place when there is a good system and a good structure in place to be able to walk out the business side of it. And for me personally, the way I look at anything that's working and functioning, I can find it in the Bible. I can find it in Scripture. I can find all the business principles that we're doing. Obviously, when you're getting into the technology, that's changed certainly. But the principle behind what we're doing in being organized, I find it in Scripture, and I see it in the book of Acts, the early church. When they started seeing this massive amount of growth, there also came a lot of problems with it, and to fix the problems, they actually put a whole system in. We find in Acts chapter 6 where they talked about structure and who's going to do what and kind of job descriptions. They just laid it out. We see that with Moses when he brought the children of Israel out of the wilderness. He's got over 1 million people with him. And I'm thinking about this because I'm really excited about Exodus tomorrow. I'm going to go watch Gods and Kings with my wife on our date day, so this is fresh in my mind. I'm going to see how biblically accurate it is. Noah didn't quite make the cut, but I love the movie anyway. But this idea where he came out and his father-in-law showed up, and Moses is doing everything. And his father-in-law says to him, this isn't good for you and it's not good for the people. You got to create some systems. Choose out men, get this thing all situated. They can't all come to you. You got to spread it out. And create systems so that the people's needs are met and you're not burned out, and that it brings longevity to it. So to answer your question, we certainly look at the business side of it first. We do this when we're coaching pastors to start a church, because it's the only way that church is going to be sustained if you have good organizational structure in place and you're following good business principles.
And something that I wanted you to talk about that we touched on when I was visiting you that I was really impressed with is you and Stephanie have really created another area of a system. We're still on the same topic, just something a little different that I want you to address. And I happened to ask you about, do you have a lot of people, wanting your attention when they have certain needs, whether, they're going through something or they just feel that need to connect to you. And what you shared with me is that you have another system in place where you have different groups and teams and team leaders so that people have direct access to the support that they need long before you might ever be available. They can get their needs met, and that actually, to me, in business is a way to delegate so that you're available for what we always refer to as, the best and highest use of your time. So talk a little bit about, those structures that you have in place as a way to, I refer to it again as, being able to effectively delegate, because, when I asked you the question, I thought of others that I know, and you can't be everywhere and you can't do anything because then you wouldn't be there, managing the systems that are helping the church grow and being able to serve more people.
Yeah, and I think that's it's so good. I don't know, and you rub shoulders a lot more with business leaders than I do. Obviously, I rub a lot of shoulders with pastors, and there is we use the terminology in the church, the Messiah complex. It's this idea that you're the only one that can fix everybody, and part of it is, when you're leading a small church and you're being compensated to do so, there's almost a sense of, you have to work through the sense of maybe even guilt potentially, or now I have to, so they're paying me to go and visit them in the hospital, and it's just a shifting in our mindset. And so again, to go back to Scripture in the Bible. The Apostle Paul, when he was planting churches all over the Mediterranean ring, and one of the churches, one particular, was the church at Ephesus. And when he was teaching them, he shared with them the whole purpose of a pastor. And in Ephesians chapter 4, he says that the pastor, the what we would know as the leader of the church, their job is to actually equip people to do ministry for the edifying of the body of Christ. So when we're looking at that, it's like my job isn't so much to be hands-on, one-on-one with every person and every need. My job is actually to empower, to strengthen, to equip others to minister. So I say it like this, like I'm not the paid holy man. I'm not the guy that's just going to show up and do every wedding and every funeral and every hospital visitation and every counseling session. My job is actually to train, to empower others that have those gifts, that are much more effective at it. So I'll tell people, if I show up at the hospital, you know, and I'll get this look like, oh no, Pastor Dan's here, because I know if I'm showing up, you're in a really bad state. You're like not just in there for a broken arm or a little outpatient procedure. So the system that we put in place is that we want people to come on the weekend and have an experience in our church. But the next step is we want them to connect with other followers of Jesus like themselves. We want them to connect with other people in the church, because that's where real life change takes place. So every one of our Connect group leaders, they know their role is actually to help me pastor this church on a pastoral care side. And we just saw it happen last week. We had a gentleman in our church that experienced a stroke. And before I even knew about it, their entire Connect group already knew about it, already planning out how they're going to help provide meals for this family. Before I even knew the man was in the hospital, they're already caring for him and his family. And that's the power of it, because we're not as effective as we think we are, and we're just not as effective as we can be when it's just on us. And so by empowering other people and putting those systems in place, we actually broaden the ability of the whole scope of the church and the organization. And that certainly fits in business. I can't imagine the business owners that I do know. They are just so good at building teams and delegating responsibility and not allowing, you know, overlap in roles. I mean, they're just really focused on that.
Well, and that is true, and I think anyone that is successful, either in a small business or a very large corporation, one of the things that makes them successful, like you said, is the ability to surround themselves with teams of people that can be leaders themselves, and that's where you kind of get that, you know, that tiered effect.
Yeah, and if I can say one more thing just real quick
Sure.
on that, the average church in America right now is under 100 people that attend on the weekend. So we're talking 85 to 90% of churches that people attend. They're attending a church that's less than 100 people. And so you can see like this, and what we found is like the hardest barrier to break for a church is that 100 to 150 barrier. And it's because of that. It's because of the pastor usually has a great caring gift. They're great at mingling with people. They're maybe a good communicator from the platform. They're a great Bible teacher, but the business, the structure, the organizational leadership side is what's lacking and where they're held back from pushing forward because of that.
Well, that is so important that you said that, because
Wait, Dr. Allen, I was going to say, isn't that something that we see all the time with chiropractors and other health providers? They're great servers, but some of them are not good at understanding what Pastor Dan just said.
Well, I think most of them, and what I was going to say about what Pastor Dan just said is, my wife and I visit a church in a town that's about 40 minutes from us, and friends of ours actually own the church, and they have a great heart, and they have a great message, and whenever we go there, we feel what a positive experience to be able to get that vibe in your life. And their church has no members, or it has under 100 members at that church. And I always leave that shaking my head and going, why isn't this place like having people literally hanging from the rafters, so to speak, to get in the door? And it's literally what you're talking about. And that's so, on one hand, it's so disappointing. But I guess, and I think this is the question I have, how do you make those people realize the value of working with someone like yourself? Because isn't there an element how people interpret the Bible that they kind of feel, well, you know, we open the door and they will come. Yeah. I mean, isn't that really a sort of a hurdle you have to get past?
Yeah, because a lot of church leaders have this idea that if it's going to grow, it's almost a mystery. It's almost like a supernatural thing. And if it's not growing, then somehow God isn't allowing it to grow. Like there's this spiritual, and I'm sure you don't see this so much in the chiropractor world or the business world, that it becomes like this mystical thing, but it's just quite interesting how we, and I use the word blame, that we blame God for so much that's just not Him. And to convince them or get them to see it, you know, that I call it job security. I mean, like, that's why we're still here. Like, we're just working so hard to help to help leaders see differently, see their role differently, and see that it's really simple. It's not rocket science. It's not rocket science that we're into here. It's organization, and simple organization, and they're simple principles, and they're doable, and they're workable. The biggest hurdle that we have in the church and with church leaders is that they kind of the question that you had asked before, do you drive them toward business or church first, which, and it's helping them to realize that there is no disconnect from organizational leadership and good business principles. There's no disconnect from that to the Bible. There's at all, absolutely not. So it's just helping them to see that as best that we can.
Sometimes I think you have to quote Scripture to make them understand that the Scripture is leading the way to adopt these principles for their success, right?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's what we call the why behind the what. Why am I? You're telling me to do this, but why? And it's helping them to see that it's an idea of vision. To get somebody, we used to say that if to lead somebody in a vision way, I'm going to cast vision. I'm going to cast this great picture of where we can be and get everybody just amped up about this amazing future that we have. But unfortunately, we're such creature of habits, and if just seeing something, a bright future, doesn't necessarily motivate us. So what we're discovering is we actually have to point people and help them to see what about their current situation is unacceptable to a point where we can't stay here anymore. This is not. So with churches, it's helping them to realize that there is just a massive amount of people around them. So this, for a business owner, you've got thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of potential clients, customers in a 10-mile radius, especially here in Randolph. We've got 103 households in a 10-mile radius, maybe even a little bit more from where our church is located right now. These are all people that, on a spiritual side, we believe God's called us to reach, or at least to help them to hear the message. We got to let them know, like, what we're at right now is unacceptable. We can't stay here. And you got to almost help them to see the problem first of how bad the current situation is. And then it's like, you're right, this is horrible. What do we do? Then you can begin to, now they're desperate to hear the solution. So it's almost helping to walk them out of a state of denial that it's not as bad as we're seeing it that it is. It's helping them to see that where you're at right now currently is unacceptable. We can't stay here. It cannot remain the way it is. There's not one business owner that went into business. There's not one chiropractor that went into practice. There's not one pastor that went into church leadership to do so because they thought that everything else was okay. They went inside because they had a burden to bring about change. And somehow, just the amount of energy and passion and resources and time that it takes to get something off the ground somehow sucks all of that passion out of us. And so it's almost like we got to go back in and restoke the fire. Like, you cannot remain content just because you got this thing off the ground, that all of a sudden, if it's going to be successful, it's some by chance thing. It's like we got to get that passion burning again in our leaders.
Yeah. And what about the same challenge that we reach with business people? What about those who have a fear of success? I know people always say fear of failure, but for most people, we really think it's fear of success, that they'll be put in a position where there'll be lots of people, they'll have lots of exposure, there'll be a lot of things they'll have to live up to now that they're out there, and exposing themselves. Is that also a challenge?
I've not had that as much. Usually what it is guys feeling so sorry for themselves of that they're not successful, and then successful people telling them that it's harder being successful than it is where you're at right now. Leading a church of 100 or 200 or 300, the weight or the burden of that to a church of a few thousand, from the amount of much scrutiny there is and the eyes on you and all of that. So I've not so much run into that, other than on the side where there is someone that maybe there's some things that they know about themselves that they wouldn't want somebody else to know about. But in a lot of those cases, there's almost like a degree of self-sabotage, and that's really become the issue more than there is of organizational leadership ineptness. It's just more of like we keep shooting ourselves in the foot because we don't want to be found out, kind of a thing.
And kind of in the same tone, I'm curious. Do you ever come across people, and we come across people that are, very good at the mechanics of what they do, but in all honesty, they shouldn't be business owners. They shouldn't own their own practice or their own business. They should be in the capacity of working for someone where they can really thrive. They're never gonna be able to get those systems and that level of motivation to be effective. Do you ever run across pastors that you feel should be almost like assistants to someone else, and do you make that recommendation?
Yes, I do run across it, and it's a hard recommendation to make. Most guys like myself that have started something were on staff somewhere else at another time. They were under somebody, and for whatever reason, either for me personally, I knew what we were supposed to do. Like there was this call, this burden, like I couldn't escape it. There's nothing else that I could do in my mind. Like this was it. A lot of guys will start something new and fresh simply because they're discontented with where they are. And it's a tough call when you're dealing with just that of it's somebody's calling. But we in our network, in our circle, especially with Next Level Coaching, we've walked with guys through closing churches down or handing a church over to somebody else. We've seen them go on staff with someone else. And I guess the thing is that to have that hard conversation with someone that has sacrificed as much as any business owner or entrepreneur. I mean, we all know if you started something, you know what it takes to pull that off, and then it's not working as well as it should. So there's a lot of assessing that goes into it. There's a lot of looking at that pastor themselves, the couple as a whole, the church, how they're doing financially, how they're doing numerically. Are they making an impact? Where are they at? And then assessing, should they continue on? But yeah, you certainly see that that there's some that they probably would be better as what we would call a second in command or an associate pastor or an executive pastor.
Yeah, and we see that, often with doctors as well. Sometimes they're great doctors and they go out on their own, and people don't understand what it takes to run your own business, no matter what kind of business it is, until you actually do it. I don't care how many people you work for, and sometimes we actually find that, that's not the right place for you. So it's hopefully at times we could gear them back into the right spot and they can be happy. Dr. Allen, I know you're unmuted.
Yeah, one of the things, and I think that this show came about, one, because we had such a great experience the first time you were on the show, but also I think from the conversations that Dr. Randi and I had after she visited your business, and how the positive, she was like pumped up and excited when she came back to tell me about it, which I thought was terrific. And then we started talking about the things that you do to build your business and the things that you teach are very much how this conversation came about. The same things that we teach other people about their business, even if they're not in the spiritual business, the religious business, they're a doctor or a healthcare provider, whatever it is. And so, it's almost a numbers game. You get people that come to your church. They don't all become members of the congregation. Some of them do, some of them don't, and of course, it may not be everybody's thing. But then there's the other challenge in teaching people to be successful, and I guess I want to know if you have this also, is they can't all be Pastor Dan. And sometimes they want to mimic Pastor Dan, thinking, well, the only way I could be successful is if I'm Pastor Dan. So they take on a personality that's not theirs, and that doesn't come across as sincere to the people that are following them, and that's another mistake that people could possibly make.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're constantly helping our guys. One of the things, the way we'll say it is, you got to find your own voice. You have to find your way of saying something, maybe in a model where there can be, like we see great, very successful churches with real catchy mission statements and slogans and things that they're doing, and whether it's a logo look or color or whatever, and we somehow think there's some magic in that, like the Jack and the Beanstalk. We just bury that and it'll grow. But it's really telling guys, you got to find your own voice. There's nothing new under the sun. there's the mission for the church as a whole. The mission is to help people find Jesus. I mean, that's our mission. That hasn't changed for 2,000 years. But how we communicate that mission and the individual story that we have in communicating that mission is what we're trying to drive guys to. There's a reason that there's 4 Gospels at the beginning of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's 4 different accounts of Jesus. And so why do we need 4? Because there's 4 different personalities, there's 4 different viewpoints, there's 4 different ways of doing this. So there certainly is a trap that some guys fall into of just kind of emulating or mimicking somebody else and just taking this model and kind of just putting it in place without any personality. And part of the process of growing an organization is really finding your voice and being able to communicate your culture in a way that not necessarily for the purpose of being different than anybody else, but it will be different than anybody else because it is personal.
Well, we're just about out of time. I always feel like we want to just keep talking to you for a long time. Well, we'll have to keep on our reoccurring guest list from time to time and bring you back and keep chatting with you, because we know we get great response from you. But I want to give you a second, Pastor Dan. I was going to call you Dr. Dan again, too. We're going to definitely send you some kind of a official certificate. But I just want to give you a second to kind of maybe, sum up any thoughts that we didn't ask you about that you didn't get an opportunity to share before we close out the show.
Thank you so much, and again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on and to share with you, Randy, and Dr. Allen, and all the listeners or watchers, those that are on. It's really special and an honor for us. We work extremely hard, just like everybody else, to kind of live out the dream and the passion that's in our heart, and to see that it's making a difference and impacting others is huge. And I just would really like to, this is, if I can, just a little, my final words are just a plug for, we're in this holiday season, this Christmas season. This is the time. Go find some people to be around, whether that's at a church, a synagogue, a community group. Find some people to be around and allow the power of relationships to really add to your life. And just really encourage you to do that. And if you are looking for a church and you're up in this area, we'd love to have you at Life Church, but there are so many great churches all around and great community groups. Find some community and find some friends and make your life better because of it.
Well, I think that is an amazing place to finish, and I think that that's a great message for this time of year. And any of you that are in, I guess that's Morris County area of New Jersey. Yeah. It's worth a trip to go visit Pastor Dan and his wife Stephanie, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed. It's really, they call it the experience. It is really a great experience. So we're going to flip it over to Dr. Allen to close us out. As always, if you're interested in any of our programs, we have very unique marketing programs, Community Wellness Day, as well as other programs that we show you, teach you, making sure that you're getting the best presence in your community to grow your business effectively. Dr. Allen, it's all yours.
Well, fantastic. I want to thank Pastor Dan. One thing about I always get out of speaking with Pastor Dan and having him on the show is the truth is always the truth, and he speaks the truth. He does it in his way, with what his message is. We do it in our way, and it's always refreshing to know that the truth always works, and it's sort of a universal truth, so that's terrific. Today's episode of Building Your Wellness Brand Within Your Community has been brought to you by Epic Consulting, making sure your electronic presence is all it needs to be. Community Wellness Day, every great opportunity begins with the first step. Take that step with Community Wellness Day. The System, the official marketing program for healthcare practitioners everywhere. The VIP app, the only application that allows you to bring these live events to the desktop, smartphone, and tablet of all those people that have you in their circles. And of course, don't forget the new Google Plus in 10-minute program. You can learn more about that at tinyurl.com/Google in 10. In behalf of myself, Dr. Allen Weinstein, and my co-host, Dr. Randi Ross, we'll look forward to seeing you on our next show.
Bye, everyone.